Did you know that there's a way to take stamps, stencils, and dies and unlock completely new ways to use them just by changing how you think about patterns? We're going to look at creating patterns at 3 levels: quick win, get creative, and push the limits. And you're going to see it all, what I learned and where it got messy. And by the end, you'll start spotting patterns in the supplies you already own. Let's get started. The best way to get a pattern quick win with a stamp is a background stamp that has a pattern built right in. I'm using bold circles from Concord and Night, and it's a clear background stamp. Usually I'm not a huge fan of these. I find that this much photopolymer can be difficult to deal with, but I love this pattern so much, I still had to have it. But I'm not going to just stamp it down in one color. I've done that already. I wanted to play with an idea from last week and try to use a brayer to blend my 3 colors of ink: limoncello, do-si-do, and skylight. Now, one thing we learned is that when you brayer ink onto a stamp, the brayer picks up a lot of the ink, and you may need to keep rolling back onto the stamp to get a really good impression. And that's kind of cool. But to take this simple pattern to the next level, I shifted it kind of up and over, and I turned it so that my colors will be going vertically this time. I love the blends I'm getting here. The yellow is turning almost an olivey green, and the purple created with the skylight and do-si-do is almost gray. If you're thinking it's too muddy for your taste, don't worry. I've got lots of other looks with these colors as well. I finished all my cards today very simply, and in many cases where I made a full A2 card front panel, I split it in 2 to make 2 square cards. Here, I cut the pattern on an angle for some added interest, and I finished with stamp sentiments and homemade embellishments cut from honey gold cardstock. The get creative level with a stamp is to take a stamp that you can repeat a few times to create a background. This is a strip of solid daisies from Uniko in the UK, and I can see that it's 1/2 inch wide. This makes it very easy to build a background by shifting my cardstock in my MISTI up by 2 squares or 1/2 inch, and then I can stamp it again. You could build a whole panel with just 1 color, but I'm using my 3 colors again. But instead of just yellow, pink, blue, I'm doing yellow, pink, yellow, blue, yellow, pink, and so on. This will give me more of a yellow panel. And you don't have to worry as the cardstock goes up beyond that top border of the MISTI. The door won't damage or mark the panel, and it can just hang over as you keep moving it up, following the grid lines until you've filled in the whole thing. And here's a quick tip. My limoncello ink pad got contaminated with some skylight. If this happens, don't panic. Just press that portion of the ink pad onto a scrap piece of cardstock until it becomes clear yellow again. You'll probably need to re-ink the ink pad, but it's definitely not ruined. Again, I got 2 cards from this panel. For the first, I used about half of the panel, making sure I got all 3 colors in it, and then I added a Hero Arts Thanks Sentiment die cut to add a bit more of the pink. For the next card, I cut my waffle flower Happy Word from the flowery panel, and then I backed it with a skylight shadow, which helps to make the edges of the word a little more crisp and legible. I added a strip of die cut dots in the pink and a half circle sentiment strip for my birthday word. And next, we're going to push the limits by building a background with a single stamp. I used my MISTI and a grid stencil to help me with correct placement. And first, I made sure that the grid of circles was centered over my cardstock when the stencil was right in the corner of the MISTI. I have a flower stamp that's actually a bit bigger than the holes in my stencil, but that doesn't matter. What does matter is that I can't really see where to place it so it's centered properly. There's an easy solution to this, and I just grabbed a piece of black cardstock, and now I can see the hole in the stencil as well as the flower very clearly. I closed the door of the MISTI and I picked up the stamp, and this is why it doesn't matter that the stamp is bigger than the hole. I then removed the stencil and the black cardstock, and now the stamp is exactly where I need it to be. You could just stamp this simply, but I tried another easy stamping technique that I've really enjoyed a lot lately, and that is to wipe off some of the ink with a textured cloth. To be perfectly honest, as I worked, I wasn't falling 100% in love with it. It gives kind of a faded, wispy look, but the yellow was so soft I needed to do 2 layers on those ones just to get enough ink down for it to be visible. Even though I usually like this look, I'm not sure it really worked well with these flowers. But to be honest, I was working fast to try and get through all the techniques I wanted to show you, and I didn't go back and remake any of the cards I might have remade another time. I filled in the centers with solid ink, and look what I did. I put pink in the yellow flowers, and then yellow in the pink flowers, and then I was stuck having to put blue in the blue flowers. So maybe not my best card ever, but you can see what I'm saying about creating a pattern with one stamp. Placement is a consideration, and a misty in a grid stencil like this can really help. But remember this? You can freehand it too. If you look really closely at this quilt-inspired panel that I made a few weeks ago, you can see that the lines aren't 100% straight, but it's close enough and honestly, much faster. I finished this card with a label block sentiment from Ink Blot Shop. Let's move on to stencils. And for the quick win, the easiest way to create a pattern is to use one that's already created by using a stencil that covers your full panel. This is the new Daisy Bloom layering stencil from Fawn, and I'm excited about this one. It has 3 layers and one masks off the daisies so you can leave the daisies white with a colorful background. The layer numbers are etched into the stencils themselves, but I like to use a Sharpie. It's more visible and it makes it quick for lining them up. Now I'm taking a quick little detour and showing you a bonus pattern just because you can use these stencils in a number of combinations. This is layer 1 and I'm creating colorful daisies with a white background. I could use layer 3 to fill in the centers, but I like the airy feeling I've got. Now here's layer 2, which is the mask where I can use my colors to create a dark background with white daisies. I could have added layer 1 back in for more definition in the daisies, but I'm skipping it and I jumped right to layer 3 with the centers. I went traditional and I used yellow. Now I got 3 cards from these panels, a full square of colorful daisies, and I filled in the centers with some of the larger gold dots that I had, and I added a Kathy Zielski birthday sentiment. Then my 2-for-1. This time I did kind of a half panel with a stamped and die cut thinking of you sentiment from Simon Says Stamp. And look at me, that sentiment's not stamped in black this time. And for the other card, I did more of a 2/3 panel, and I added a Hero Arts die cut Happy in white along with a block sentiment label birthday from Ink Blot Shop. Now let's get creative. This is a big stencil that's really just a bunch of shapes, but there are these 3 little pies that I can use to build a grid pattern. It's important to mask off any areas around that you don't want to get ink into, and in my own lazy way, I filled in each row with the same color in each one. That way no cleaning is involved, but it does mean I have rows of single colors. Now I've used this stencil and these 3 little pies to create a different pattern, a whole row of them across a Z-fold card, and I moved the stencil each time so that the little pies were closer together. So that's another way to use a pattern that already exists in a stencil, but build it out to create something more. To finish this one, I went super simple. Just gold dots in the centers and an old Altenew thanks sentiment. Now we're pushing the limits. I'm sure you're getting this now. This time we're looking for a single shape to make a pattern with. Well, I'm actually going to use 2. A smaller and larger daisy from the Concord 9th Geomod layering stencil set. This set is fantastic with all these shapes. They're designed to layer up in a very balanced way, but you can change all that and do it however you want. This time I'm really freehanding the pattern, no stencil grid to help me. So I started at the top center with the larger flower and I blended the yellow and pink inks into that. Then I moved to the smaller daisy and I really made a conscious decision about how far away it was as well as its position. Did I want 1 petal at the top? Yes, I did. And how were they spaced compared to the petals on the large one? Because I need to repeat this. I masked off the edge and then blended yellow and blue ink this time. I filled in the first row and then I moved down to the second one, really watching how I was placing each flower in relation to the others. This can take a bit of practice and it certainly takes some time, but it really is a great way to get more from your stencils and make cards that are truly unique. For the flower centers this time, I used little dots in the stencil and the 3rd color for each flower. This pattern is delicate and pretty, so I used a handwritten type birthday sentiment from Kathy Zielski. But I was thinking, since so many of you liked that sketchy tulip last week, this one could have a totally different feel if you got out a black pen. Okay, let's move on to die cuts. And you know we're starting with the quick win. Choose something that covers your card, like a cover plate. This one's from Catherine Pooler, and I love it because it cuts dots I can use in other projects. But this time, I colored them with my inks and I inlaid them back into the design. And speaking of those sketchy tulips from last week, the flower I used here is from that same folksy floral set from Altenew, and I think it works perfectly to draw attention to the sentiment in the center. The Many Thanks is from an old Mama Elephant set that is perfect when you want something really small. Now let's get creative. This pattern place set from Concord 9th is perfect for quickly building a pattern, but still giving you more creative freedom than maybe a cover plate does. The background has all the shapes laid out for easy placement, and then you cut the shapes to lay it out on top. Each die cuts a number of the shapes. I used my 3 colors and I cut what I needed to get a nice mix on that inner square while leaving the border of white around it. I used one of my favorite sentiment sets from Avery Elle to create a circle in the center, which fits really well with the geometric feel of the background. And finally, let's push the limits by creating our own pattern with one die. This Poppy Stamps die actually cuts a whole bunch of Nordic Flourishes, which is nice. I cut it 9 times, but I only used 3 shapes, which means I have a whole bunch of other shapes for future cards. I love to have extras on hand. I colored the flowers with Do-Si-Do, and then the centers with limoncello, and those tiny little, ghosts? Paisleys? With a skylight. Again, I used a grid stencil to help me with the placement, but if I had more patience or maybe just more time, I could have cut out more of the shapes and then just filled in the whole panel with each flower, touching all of the flowers around it. That's actually an easy way to create a pattern because all you do is put everything as close together and you don't have to worry about making sure the space is equal between them. But maybe then I wouldn't have had the space to add those little blue ghosts, and I think they look kind of cute. That's another Kathy Zielski sentiment, and I think the fancy font goes well with the flourishes. You're not stuck with a grid pattern either. If you've got tools like the stamp wheel or the stamp and spin tool or Stencils 360, you can also build circular patterns. Once you start looking at your stash differently, the possibilities really are endless. If you want to do a deeper dive into grid layouts and how they can bring structure and balance to your cards, click right here to see my deep dive on using grid layouts in your cards. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.